I've started a mini Twitter controversy, and not really a big deal. I didn't actually insult anyone. It's just that all the amateur mixed martial arts experts and the knowledgeable historians out there on Twitter have weighed in again on who could kick who's and the fact that modern fighting techniques have just evolved so well that apparently Matt Riddle's now one of the world's most dangerous men in the eyes of some of these people. Did you hear about this?
I saw you retweet an article about him saying that the wrestlers today, I believe, weren't soft, but are actually more intelligent than the wrestlers of years past.
Well, yes, and he was responding to Undertaker's soft comment, which we're going to weigh in on that in a minute, folks. Spoiler alert, but let me digress for a second. We'll come back to it. Because then Riddle made everybody else's point trying to make his own, is what he did. But what he was saying was, oh, bro, we're not soft. We're smarter than they were back in those days. We don't bring guns to work because they have like metal detectors now, man. I swear to God, he said, we have metal detectors now. You fucking vapid twit. That's not the point that he was trying to make. So I'll try to flesh out what I believe to be Taker's point in a minute. But I had responded on Twitter just that this guy is always doing something to run his fucking yap. And remember, he's the one that is trying to shoot his own angles to work with Brock Lesnar, where Brock had to get in his face and say, you and I will never work together. Flat out to him. And he wants to work. He doesn't understand how this business works, because apparently what we see on screen is not that much of a gimmick. He has an understanding the depth of a snake's belly in a wagon rut about what this business is or has been in the past. But I'd mentioned just his overall disrespectful to everybody, whether it's knocking the guys of the past, we're smarter than they are, or athletes are better now, or the business is better because of this or that, or whether he's one of the performance entertainment guys. Even he's got the UFC background, so he can pull the performance card if he wants to and still look like a badass. The point is, I just said I would have loved to have seen this yap running in the locker rooms with anybody from Hodge to Dr. Death around to shove his head up his ass when that would have been tolerated, basically as a basis of my tweet. And missing the point of the whole thing, everybody then, it started an argument as to whether Matt Riddle could kick the shit out of Dr. Death. And I'm like, fuck. And that's why I say all the amateur MMA experts came out of the woodwork. And the fighting techniques have really improved over the years. One of the knuckleheads I saw on Twitter even said, well, no, Riddle could beat Hodge. I'd like to say here right now at the outset of this program that if there is within the sound of my voice any current or former high-level mixed martial artist, amateur wrestler, expert trainer or coach in same, or valid historian with a learned opinion that anybody gives a shit about, that wants to plead the case that Danny Hodge could not in any form of combat have fucking humbled Matt Riddle, I will give you the opportunity to come on the program here and plead that argument. And I don't think we'll have any fucking takers. But as far as, again, because poor Doc, he's going to be forever remembered as the 40-year-old guy with a torn hamstring that got knocked out in an amateur boxing match. And it wasn't limited to there. I was limited to 240 characters. You could have mentioned at any given point in a number of eras, Bill Miller, Carl Gotch, Billy Robinson, Haku. And a lot of these fucking supposed experts of today will think, because they've seen pictures of these guys when they were fat and 60, that there's no way that they could have beaten Matt Riddle because he was in the UFC. Brian, I ask you, well, first of all, yes, I understand Matt Riddle could whip Dr. Death today because Doc's dead. And he probably could have whipped Dr. Death right before Doc died when he was fucking 50 or whatever. But if you followed the train of thought of my tweet and you put Matt Riddle in the locker rooms of a territory in any era when the business was still respected and people took up for it amongst the boys, amongst themselves, if he walked back in the locker room after saying some shit like he says, then, Brian, I asked you, if both Matt Riddle, how old is he today? See, what is he, 28, 30 maybe?
I'll look that up right now.
Look it up right now. Because let's say he's 28 years old. 28-year-old Matt Riddle walks into the locker room with 28-year-old Dr. Death Steve Williams.
35.
He's 35. All right, well, he's a youthful-looking fellow. All right, I don't remember whether fucking Doc was broke down or not by the time he was 35. But let's say they were both 30. Let's just split the difference. Because I knew Doc best when he was in his mid to late 20s. They're both 30 years old. Matt Riddle walks in a locker room after running his mouth, disrespecting wrestling, calling it a fucking show, saying he's smarter than all the fucking guys, whatever the fuck. And Dr. Death is pissed at Matt Riddle. Matt Riddle is what? Is he 200 pounds? Did he fight at 190 in the UFC? Dr. Death is 290 to 310, depending. Dr. Death is a 4-time All-American fucking collegiate wrestler at a major university and fucking was dominant at that, as well as a 4-time All-American football player. And he's also probably coked up. At this point, Dr. Death does not walk up to Matt Riddle and say, Mr. Riddle, I have a problem with what you've said, and therefore I would like to challenge you to a grappling contest on the mat with Pee Wee Anderson here serving as referee, and one of us will eventually tap out. I don't think he would do that. I think Dr. Death would do what I've seen him do before, thankfully not to me, but to people with whom he was not pleased with, and go, motherfucker, I'll rip your fucking throat out. Followed by getting that wild-eyed expression and smothering fucking Matt Riddle with goddamn his 300 pounds, bashing his fucking brains out, going for his goddamn eyes. And if Matt Riddle tried to get a jiu-jitsu move on him in that environment, there's chairs, there's benches, there's lockers, there's bottles, there's bags. And I wouldn't imagine that Doc would have a problem with picking one up and bashing fucking Matt Riddle over the fucking head with it. Now, you can substitute the style of confrontation. If it had been Danny Hodge might very well have said, Mr. Riddle, I've got a problem. I can't do Hodge's voice with what you just said about our business, and I'm going to teach you some respect. And then he would have taken Matt Riddle down and stretched him right there, whether it was a mat or a ring or whatever, because it was Danny fucking Hodge. Or if it was Haku, maybe he would have just bit the guy's face off without talking to him at all. Or if it was Bill Miller in 1956, he would have been 6'6" and 280 pounds and an NCAA heavyweight champion, and he would have stretched Matt Riddle. Or what? Why is it that just because this guy was a low-level UFC fighter, that the modern fans don't understand that just because wrestling is a work does not mean that anybody that was in it that has ever populated the locker rooms couldn't kick the shit out of Matt Riddle for real?
Well, I think one of the important things, too, is what you referenced before talking about Brawl for All. The UFC, there are rules. In a fight, in a locker room or wherever else, there are no rules. It's a fight.
Yeah, well, there were rules in a Brawl for All. They were just stupid rules.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, Dr. Death was already 40 years old, and he was wearing gloves, and there were rules. It wasn't like, go fight Billy Gunn in an alley. It's go fight him under these rules. So there's a difference between a UFC fight, a fight with rules, and an actual fight, a real fight.
But they have to slag poor Doc off because he got knocked out in a fucking bad tough man contest. But it's just the fact of the matter is this is what I meant by touching on what Undertaker said. And I guess people just can't perceive it unless they've seen it, either the fans of that time period from the outside or me from the inside. Wrestling, what pro wrestling truly is miles away from what today's product is. And when Undertaker said the product is soft or the guys are soft, that doesn't mean that, my God, they could have George St. Pierre could be sitting in the locker room drinking milk and playing video games and going out and being polite and saying, I'm so happy to be here in the WWE, and he would come off soft. The baddest fighter, real fighter in the world. It's Vince McMahon's favorite saying that he said more times than anything else, including pal. Perception is reality. The reason why that pro wrestling has plunged in popularity is because the perception that people have of it now. Pro wrestling is a conflict with an aura of menace and violence, with physicality. And you have heels that either project an aura of menace if they're monsters, or if they're the chicken shit heels, they project an aura of danger because they're such morally bankrupt people that will have to cheat and lie and steal. They'll do anything. And they put the baby faces, your heroes, in jeopardy of being cheated or being stolen from or being even injured, fucked up, and can't wrestle anymore. Oh, my God. And they have personal issues. And the way that this gets over is the aura that the talent casts off. Even if you know it's a work, subliminally, this guy or that guy, for whatever reason. How many times do you hear this story being told? So-and-so scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. You get enough of those people together, along with a group of likable, heroic types that, yes, when their backs are against the wall, they fight back and they overcome obstacles, but they have to be put upon first. You have to root for the underdog, and they have to try to be honorable, and then finally they go too far only to get even, blah, blah. It's a morality play. And the subliminal aura that these guys give off is more important than who they are. That's why they invented gimmicks in wrestling. The people that can portray those gimmicks are ones that have a great deal of validity to them to begin with, and they turn it up, as we've mentioned many times before. But part of the reason that those guys in the 50s or the 60s or the 70s or the 80s, not even talking about the 40s and the 30s, when these guys would probably fucking kill you as soon as look at you. But even when the business got more civilized, it was still an independent contractor's game, truly. And you still had to take care of your public image as a wrestler and not do stupid things that made you look weak or do jobs to people that you were above in the pecking order, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes when people took liberties, the booker was a wrestler himself. He'd say, if you got a problem with so-and-so, go fucking sort it out. He might try to intervene if it was going to fuck up his business, but it was probably going to fuck up his business if they didn't sort it out anyway. So he'd goddamn let him do it. And Watts was notorious for that in his territory, but all those old-timers were. But the idea, just Undertaker wasn't glorifying it. Everybody should come in a locker room with a gun in their bag. But at the same time, it was the aura and the impression that those guys gave off to the fans and to some of the other boys that they would take care of themselves if they needed to, that made them dangerous and gave them an aura of menace that the fans bought into. And we've told a story here on the program. We've read the newspaper article, Brian, remember in one of the in news segments, maybe on your show, whatever, where Johnny Valentine got arrested for, what was the charge? Public drunkenness at the Gardens here in Louisville one night in the 60s after a match with, who was it, Gene Kaniski? But that's when Bobby Heenan was there. He had always told the story that the first night he came to Louisville, Johnny Valentine got in a fucking fight in the locker room with Wee Willie Davis, who was a retired wrestler, but he was a sheriff's deputy here in Louisville at the time. And Valentine had caused a fucking stir. Wee Willie Davis goes in to goddamn arrest him. Valentine's reaching in his bag, and Wee Willie Davis starts whacking him with a fucking slapjack. That was the locker room atmosphere in a lot of places. but that transferred over to the fans believing in in the people they saw, even if they couldn't really believe what they saw. Bill Dundee had a great line in Memphis Heat, the documentary. He said, hell, the people believed it because we believed it. That was a different aura and a different atmosphere, which now they've been so homogenized and pasteurized and sanitized for your convenience, and the modern corporate atmosphere of the publicly traded companies and the blah, blah, blah. And the fact that a lot of these guys, whether they are real athletes, real fighters or not, come into this with the mindset that they're actors and entertainers. The whole thing comes off soft, not gritty and grainy, but fucking choreographed. It's gone from a conflict with an aura of menace and violence to an athletic stunt show with an aura of choreography. And I think that, with possibly not being quite as articulate as I am, is what Undertaker was trying to say when he said it's soft, because it looks soft, because these are not out of control, Wild West type, larger than life personalities that you can buy into for even 1 second, will go into business for themselves and just do what the fuck they want because they can. And that's the way you get a star in wrestling over. That's what we've lost, because there is not one fan now watching any promotion, even the ones that do it kind of gritty and realistic. They're suffering because of the mainstream presentation and the overwhelming perception, which is reality, that wrestling is a fucking gymnastics cheerleading exhibition these days. But when you have that prevailing opinion amongst the masses, it's soft. It's a show. Even if it was a show for all those other decades, it was a show with guys that were enough on the fringe of polite society in some cases that you could get into it, and they were allowed to go and do what they did. And just the fucking spontaneity and the emotion has been whipped out of this thing by the writers and or the publicly traded companies and major television networks, and or cosplay marks that have been allowed to populate the fringes. And now that the fringes are becoming mainstream because the regular fans have pretty much given up on anybody that they don't think that they can whip being a star on television anymore. What do you think, Brian?
I don't know. Don't tell me that wrestlers today are smarter than any of the wrestlers of the past when you are currently in trouble for allegedly sexually assaulting your mistress. That's what I think.
Oh, I just got that. We were back to the Riddler. I just got it.
I mean, just the whole. I couldn't get past that whole thing that wrestlers today are so much smarter than wrestlers of the past. What?
Yeah, we just, back in those days, back in the 80s, we played cards in a locker room, told fucking stories, practiced holds, went out and had matches and sold tickets. Now they have all kinds of better habits.